Hey folks, welcome back to Forgotten Battles of WWII, where we dig into the underrated stories that flipped the script on the biggest war ever. Today, we're rolling into the mud of 1941 for a classic underdog tale, how the Germans laughed at Soviet tractor tanks, those old-school light tanks like the T-26 and BT series that looked like farm machines on tracks, until these beasts crushed their fancy Panzers in the infamous Russian Rasputitsa and early Blitzkrieg chaos. Yeah, you heard that right. The Wehrmacht rolled in with their high-tech Panzer IIIs and IVs, boasting about superior engineering and Blitzkrieg speed, mocking Soviet armor as outdated junk from the 1930s, slow, thinly armored tractors that any German gun could pop like cans. But Mother Nature and Soviet resilience turned the tables hard, stranding German columns in endless mud while those primitive tanks kept moving, ambushing, and turning the tide in forgotten defenses that delayed Barbarossa big time. This is the story of how arrogance met the Russian autumn rains, with epic clashes near Smolensk, Kiev encirclements, and the road to Moscow, where light tanks became monsters. Let's dive in and see why the Germans stopped laughing fast. Picture this: June 1941, Operation Barbarossa launches. 3 million Germans storm across the border expecting a quick knockout like Poland or France, their panzers leading the charge with radios, optics, and tactics honed to perfection. Early on, it works. Soviet frontier forces get smashed, thousands of tanks captured or destroyed, many T-26s and BT-7s abandoned from surprise or mechanical woes. German reports gloat. Soviet tanks are inferior copies of outdated designs, thin armor, weak guns, no match for our 50mm. The T-26, based on British Vickers from the 30s, had 15 to 25mm armor, a 45mm gun, okay against light stuff but obsolete, and the BT series fast-wheeled tracked hybrids inspired by Christie but plagued by reliability. Hitler and generals figured the Red Army's tank park was a joke, over 20,000 tanks, but mostly these tractors, poorly maintained, crews untrained after purges. Captured ones got painted with Balkenkreuz and used against their makers, propaganda films showing Germans towing junk away. Soldiers joked about Russian farm equipment blocking roads. But here's the twist that changed everything: the Rasputitsa, Russia's infamous time without roads in autumn and spring, when rains turned dirt tracks into bottomless swamps. German Panzers, with narrow tracks optimized for European roads, sank axle-deep, engines choking on mud, supply trucks stuck miles back, entire divisions immobilized for days. Fuel, ammo, food ran low, troops shivering in open fields. Meanwhile, Soviet light tanks, especially T-26 with wider tracks in some variants, and BT's lighter weight, floated over the quagmire, maneuvering where Germans couldn't, launching counterattacks that caught columns cold. One famous example near Smolensk in July-August 1941, Soviet remnants with T-26s and BTs harassed Guderian's panzers, popping up from forests to ambush stuck vehicles, 45mm guns piercing early panzer sides at close range, machine guns mowing infantry trying to dig out. Germans furious, their superior tanks helpless, crews abandoning them to avoid capture, while tractor tanks kept fighting. In the Kiev pocket, September 1941, light tanks in breakout attempts or defenses held bridges and roads, wide tracks allowing crosses Germans avoided, delaying encirclements long enough for some escapes. The BT series, despite flaws, hit 60 miles per hour on wheels for road dashes, raiding supply lines when panzers bogged. Crews, often veterans from Spain or Finland, knew the terrain, using mud as ally, luring Germans into swamps then hitting flanks. By October, as rains worsened, German advance slowed to crawl, losing momentum before Moscow, partly because those laughed-at tanks exploited the weather weapon no blitz planned for. Hitler raged about General Mud, but it was Soviet tractors that made it hurt. Logistics nightmare amplified. Germans relied on horses for much transport, dying in mud, while Soviets had local knowledge and simpler machines easier to fix in field. Captured diaries show frustration. These Russian toys won't sink, ours do. Morale dipped as winter approached, troops realizing the inferior enemy had tricks. So, was it the tanks or the mud that really crushed the Blitz? Let's talk about the Yelnya offensive in August-September 1941, one of the first Soviet counterattacks that showed the Germans what those tractor tanks could do when the mud hit. By late summer, rain started turning central Russia into a swamp. German Group Center pushing towards Smolensk but stretching thin, supply lines vulnerable. Soviets under Zhukov launch a spoiling attack at Yelnya salient, a bulge Germans held proudly as their first big gain. Forces included mechanized corps with hundreds of T-26s, BT-7s, and some early T-34 KVs, but light tanks did the dirty work in the terrain. Germans dug in with Panzer IIIs, expecting easy defense, laughing at waves of obsolete armor charging through fog and rain. But Rasputitsa was kicking in. Roads dissolved, panzers with narrow tracks bogged down trying to maneuver, crews digging for hours while fuel trickled slow. Soviet light tanks, lighter and often with wider tracks or lower ground pressure, sloshed through, using forests and ravines for cover, popping out to flank static positions. T-26 flamethrower variants, the OT-26 or KHT-130, terrified infantry, spewing fire into bunkers Germans thought safe, while standard 45mm guns picked off stuck panzers at close range, sides and rears vulnerable before upgunning. BTs dashed on wheels along firmer paths for raids, cutting wires and supplies. One clash, a German company loses half its tanks not to direct hits, but abandonment in mud, crews watching helplessly as tractors swarm and torch them with Molotovs or guns. Soviets recapture Yelnya, first major win, boosting morale hugely, forcing Germans back 50 kilometers and exposing Blitz limits. Hitler sacks generals, rages about weather, but troops know those junk tanks exploited it perfectly. The psychological flip was massive. Early confidence turns to dread, soldiers calling Russian mud the fifth element after air, water, earth, fire, with Soviet lights its enforcers. Captured crews spread tales of ghost tanks appearing from swamps, disappearing before response. In broader Kiev disaster, September 1941, light tanks shine in pockets. Breakout groups with T-26 and BTs punch holes Germans can't plug fast due to mud, saving thousands, though overall catastrophe. Near Leningrad, too, defending with lights in marshes Germans avoid, holding lines longer. But cost for Soviets brutal. Thousands tanks lost. Many to non-combat, like drowning in bogs or fuel starvation, crews fighting outnumbered, often to death or capture. Untrained drivers flipping tanks in ditches, commanders sacrificing for time. Yet these actions bought precious weeks from Moscow mobilization, factories evacuating, T-34 production ramping. Germans learn hard, widen tracks on later panzers, develop mud solutions, but early arrogance cost momentum. The tractor tanks weren't advanced, but in Russia's unique hell, they were kings, teaching that terrain trumps tech alone. How did Soviets adapt these old designs so well? Let's go back to the roots in the Spanish Civil War, because that's where the T-26 tractor tank first earned its stripes and planted the seeds for the 1941 surprises. In 1936 to 1939, the Soviets sent hundreds of T-26s to Republican Spain, the most modern tank there, with 45mm gun and decent armor, dominating Italian CV-33 tankettes and early German Panzer Is supplied to Franco. Crews gained real combat experience, flanking maneuvers, ambushes, and rough terrain, using speed and numbers to overwhelm. Germans observed closely through Legion Condor, noting strengths like reliability in dust and hills, but also weaknesses like thin armor against 37mm guns. Many vets returned to train Red Army, teaching tactics that shone in 1941 mud. Hide in forests, wait for enemy bog, strike fast, then vanish. The BT Series 2, American Christie design, licensed, fast on wheels for roads, tracks for off-road, tested in maneuvers showing potential for deep raids, though reliability plagued from complex conversion. Purges hit hard, designers jailed or shot, production quality dipped, but sheer numbers built a force Germans underestimated. In Finland, Winter War 1939-1940, T-26s struggled in snow without wide tracks. Many lost to Molotovs and logs, teaching Soviets winter prep and wide track importance. Lessons applied in 1941 with improvised skis or local mods. Germans laughed from afar, their own tanks evolving, but missed how Soviets adapted old designs to Russia's hellscape. Now, a standout ambush near Roslav in July 1941. As Army Group Center advances, a Soviet mechanized group with BT-7s and T-26s counters from flanks, rains starting to soften ground. Germans push with Panzers on roads, but off-road stuck early, crews watching in frustration as faster BTs on wheels dash along paths, converting to tracks for hits. 45mm guns knocking out lead vehicles, blocking columns. T-26s follow in support, infantry with anti-tank rifles picking crews trying to free tanks. One German battalion loses 20-plus Panzers, mostly abandoned, not destroyed, crews hiking back humiliated. Similar near Bobroysk or Chernigov, light tanks raiding supply, forcing detours that cost days. Soviets paid heavy, outnumbered, poor coordination, air superiority letting Stukas bomb freely when weather cleared, but bought time, wearing Germans down. Crew stories grim, fighting in burning summer dust or autumn rain, engines overheating, ammo low, knowing retreat means death or gulag for cowardice. Many young, poorly trained, but fierce, ramming Panzers when guns jammed, bailing to fight as infantry. The tractors weren't invincible, thin armor popped by 50mm, gasoline engines fire risks, but in mud they ruled, teaching Germans respect. By winter, as snow hit, wide tracks excelled again, while narrow German ones slipped. This delayed Moscow push, giving time for Siberian reinforcements. Germans adapted eventually, wider tracks on Panzer IVs, Ostketten extensions, copying what they mocked. The light tanks bridged to T-34 era, mass production philosophy winning over quality alone. Forgotten because T-34 and KV stole spotlight, but without the tractors holding early, war might have ended differently. So, heroes or relics? The biggest mud disasters for the Germans came in October-November 1941, as full Rasputitsa gripped the front, turning the road to Moscow into a quagmire that swallowed the Blitz whole. Army Group Center, after Smolensk and Kiev triumphs, pushes for the final dash, but rains hit hard. Roads dissolve, fields flood, Panzers with narrow tracks sink to turrets, crews spending days winching with logs or horses that die exhausted. One infamous stretch near Vyazma-Bryansk pockets, Germans encircle huge Soviet forces, but mud slows closure, allowing escapes, while their own supplies halt, troops starving and freezing as temperatures drop. Soviet light tanks exploit chaos. T-26 and BT groups raid stranded columns, appearing from fog to blast fuel trucks or stuck Panzers, vanishing before response. A German Panzer regiment reports losing 50 vehicles in days, mostly abandoned intact from immobility, crews blowing turrets to deny capture, while tractor tanks harass relentlessly. Near Kalinin or Tula, similar, defenses with lights and swamps Germans bypass, holding key points, forcing costly detours. The delay proves fatal. By December, winter bites, Siberians arrive fresh, counteroffensive launches while Germans weakened, out of fuel, morale cracked from mud hell. Hitler fires generals like Guderian for defeatism, but troops know weather and those persistent tractors stole victory. These old tanks influenced the T-34 legend directly. Sloped armor from earlier experiments, wide tracks standard after light tank lessons, diesel engines for reliability in cold and mud, mass production philosophy proven with thousands built despite flaws. Designers like Koshkin drew from BT speed and T-26 simplicity, creating the medium that dominated later. Without light tanks buying time in 1941, no T-34 ramp-up. Crew heroism often overlooked, young men in thin armor charging superior foes, knowing one hit cooks them alive from gasoline fires, but fighting fanatically for motherland, many decorated posthumously. Stories of lone T-26 holding bridges hours, crews bailing to fight with grenades, or BTs ramming when ammo gone. Losses? Horrific. Over 15,000 light tanks gone in months, but they bled the Blitz dry. Germans learned, underestimation costs dear, terrain is weapon, quantity has quality when adapted right. By war's end, captured lights used in anti-partisan ops, irony full circle. This forgotten chapter shows no tech invincible alone. Mud and will turned tractors into beasts that saved the Soviet Union early. So what flipped the war more, the tanks or the weather they mastered? Drop thoughts in comments, like if this changed your view on 1941, subscribe for more WW2 underdogs that punched above weight, and share with history buffs. Thanks for watching Forgotten Battles of WW2. Catch you in the mud next time. Peace out.